So this patient in my office, out of nowhere, just started crying. I just kind of stood there and I was probably really awkward, really uncomfortable, don't really know how to respond when people get emotional. And then out of nowhere, she hugged me. What's up guys, Dr. Wes Hendricks. And what I want to cover in today's video is how to go from not being able to touch your toes to being able to touch your toes. The awkward moment I was referring to earlier was a patient that came in. She hadn't touched her toes since she was a teenager, and now she was 45 and was able to touch her toes for the first time. And that wasn't even the goal of why she came in the first place. She showed up with what we're gonna call as flexion intolerant lower back pain, which is really just a fancy way of saying it hurt when she bent forward. At first, I wanted to give her posterior chain mobility work that avoided flexion, so think any sort of stretches for the calves, hamstrings, glutes, and lower back, as these were the muscles mainly involved in restricting her flexion in the first place. Keep in mind, avoiding flexion was just a short-term strategy. Eventually, we want to bring it back into the mix, but when she first showed up in the office, it was an acute issue, so I want you to think of it kind of like a cut or a scab. You continue to pick at it, it's not going to heal. Before we get into how to accomplish our first toe touch, let's cover what muscles are limiting us from touching our toes in the first place. We're primarily going to be looking at the hamstrings, which consist of 3 muscles on the back of the thigh. They're the semimembranosus, semitendinosus, and biceps femoris. Their main job is to flex the knee. A great example of this is think Nordic curls. This means if we want to put tension on the muscle, we need to do the opposite movement. So in this case, think knee extension or simply just keeping the knee locked. Your hamstrings, once they cross your knee, they turn into your calves. We have the one that everyone can see, which is the gastroc. Then we have the soleus, which is much deeper. Those continue down, turning into your Achilles tendon, which then wraps up onto the bottom of your foot, forming your plantar fascia. This explains why sometimes people can foam roll the bottom of their feet and actually improve their toe touch. So it's not total bullshit. Before we go any further, let's talk about the elephant in the room, spinal flexion. And I can tell you guys, my go-to for anything spinal related or pain and injury related in general is gonna be Dr. Greg Lehman. It might be Lehman. I'll put the info to his site below. When we talk about flexing versus not flexing our spine, it might not even matter in the first place. Sounds so negative. Here's one particular example of a study where what appears to be a neutral spine actually has a good degree of flexion occurring. Even when performing textbook squats and hip hinge patterns, we're still going to have a good degree of flexion occurring. Where I stand on this topic, personally, I don't give a shit. Flexion's one side of the coin, a neutral spine, whatever that means, is the other side of the coin. To have a healthy spine, you want to be competent in both. You want to have options. I typically like to start people off with the one-legged good morning just because it's a great way to teach and reinforce the hip hinge pattern, which a lot of people just royally fuck up. A lot of the times when people hear good mornings or weighted mobility, they think more weight's going to be better and help us reach our goal faster. 99.9% of you will actually be starting out with just a stick. Go ahead and grab a PVC pipe. A broomstick works just as well. Place it on top of your shoulders. Take a grip width that you find comfortable. The stick is going to allow you to accentuate pinching your shoulder blades together, which is going to extend your upper back, trickling down your, fancy word here, kinetic chain to your lower back, creating this nice anterior pelvic tilt, which is what we're looking for in order to keep tension on those hamstrings. Prior to breaking at your hips, you want to shift as much of your weight as you can to the working side. That non-working leg is just going to be out to the side in order to maintain your balance. As you go to lower down, I like to think about cueing the hips back and leading with the chest. Both of these cues do a really good job of keeping tension or a stretch on the hamstrings throughout the entire range of motion. You only want to go as far as you can where you're going to maintain strong tension or a strong stretch in the hamstrings. For most people, this is really going to be a minimal change in torso angle. This is completely fine because over time as the hamstrings improve, you'll be going deeper and deeper. Common errors. Let's talk about how people fuck this one up. Hands down, the biggest error is going to be going too deep. You want to increase the depth, but not at the expense of losing or taking tension off the hamstrings. You can see in the video on the left, I maintain a nice lumbar lordosis or anterior pelvic tilt, which we already know is going to put tension on my hamstrings. Compare this to the video on the right. Even though I'm going deeper, you can clearly see I'm rounding in my lumbar spine, making this movement less effective. For people that struggle to grasp this concept, I like them to lower their chest to a target. This cue of leading with the chest most of the time tends to self-correct the problem. The next error that we already briefly touched on is just adding too much weight. While this is considered a weighted mobility exercise, unfortunately that gives the illusion the more weight the better. The problem with using too much weight is we end up compensating or guarding and not going as deep as we could have if we used less weight. I like to tell my athletes and patients that I work with, unless you can comfortably palm the floor, a stick to max 15 pounds is going to be more than enough to help you reach your goals. Either way, it's just better to start out with light loads, and as your mobility improves and you get the hang of the movement, you can start adding weight. Honestly guys, the one-legged good morning by itself is most likely all you need to finally get your first toe touch. And if you're getting value from this video, be sure to hit that like button. But if you want to cover all your bases, let's look at mobilizing the calves also. There's going to be numerous ways to stretch the calves, but this, in my opinion, is hands down the most effective way to do it. I got this drill from one of the coaches I've worked with, and since then I've used it with really great success with my patients looking to improve their posterior chain mobility. For the setup, go ahead and lean back. This is really going to allow you to dorsiflex the foot pretty high up. And then from there, you can fill the space between the hips and the wall by shooting the hips forward with a straight knee while the shoulders stay back. Ideally, stall bars are the best setup for these, but if you don't have access to them, a squat rack or even a doorway can work just fine. The most common error with this one's gonna be not dorsiflexing the foot up high enough. While you're not really gonna see me wearing shoes very often, shoes are really gonna come in handy with this one, as the traction on the bottom of your shoes is really gonna help set your foot up to get a good stretch with this one. Here's what that actual routine looks like. Most of my clients and patients have had really good success performing this anywhere from 2 to 4 times a week. That frequency is really going to be dependent on how sore you get the next day from it and how tight your hamstrings are. Alright guys, that's all I've got for you on how to touch your toes. Thank you so much for watching. Please be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss out on future videos, and I'll see you guys next week.